Everything is personal right here. Everything is personal right here.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Everything is Personal. And today, our guest is Daniel Toshan. Close?
You got it. Yeah. Taoshan. There we go. I got
Toshan.
USA in my
Toshan.
name.
Toshan. I wanted to ask you this question. I'm curious about this divide. So you're a guy that integrates science and also philosophy and into health and wellness. And I wanted to kind of understand sort of where there is a divide or where you draw the line between scientific knowledge and belief, because there's I guess in this whole biohacking and longevity and all this other stuff with Healthspan that we do, we have real science, and then we have, I don't know if I want to call it pseudoscience, but we have belief system, we have information that we're gathering. Well, how do you separate the two, or do you at all?
Oh, definitely important to separate it too and find where we integrate it. So that's a perfect way to segue into knowledge and belief, right? Knowledge is science, right? When you get into believing science, it's no longer science. Now it's becoming a religion. So always important to be able to talk about, ask questions. And science is a bit dirty where you're going to go at it a very negative way. Why? Because you want to be able to save time. And so if you have an idea, I'm going to try and cut it down out of love. And once you're in that, you understand that you don't take it personally. When you hear two scientists talking, it's very dry, it's super technical, and very, very informative from them too. What data they need to do, what observations they gotta double check. It's like a transaction like no one has seen, call it, in the public eye. But our belief systems, without them, we wouldn't be able to do science. So it's a little bit of an interesting, call it, conundrum, because you can very much do the pseudoscience of, hey, I believe this, and go down the route of chasing a red herring. That's how the research community calls it. You do work for decades, resulting in nothing. But every scientist has to have at least one belief. And the belief is that there is an objective truth. So because I say, okay, well, the ocean tides have a certain pattern, the sun, the way, the earth and the sun, the relationships, it has a certain pattern. And if I don't believe the fact that there is a pattern, that it's just going to be different every day I wake up, well, there's no basis for us to be able to categorize, systemize, and bring out the world as we know it. And so the belief is that there's an objective reality. And there starts a very hard part to say, okay, well, can I ever prove causality? It's a principle. We all are within the confines of time. And so we know that we have to concede certain things in order to be able to do science, to get any work done. And so this is a part that's very difficult, because a lot of times, even as meticulous as you are, beliefs creep into the way that you practice doing something. And so your observations, the way you form an observation, I can do my best to articulate what I'm seeing, but I might do a bad job of characterizing what the actual pattern is. And if that portion of science is not right, if I'm not extremely scrutinous or restrictive or humble in my approach of what I observe, it allows a very, call it, snowball effect, a cascading effect of errors to then occur. Because science is very simple. Observe, measure, predict, right? That's what you're doing. And then you share those predictions. And if they're ever 100%, it ends up incorporating into our greater being. So absolutely imperative that we have some levels of beliefs, because they're going to guide us, if we're honest enough, into being able to make those observations, so that we can start communicating what is it that we're seeing, what is it that we can envision that maybe others can't, so that we can bring it into the world.
Working with scientists over the years, one of the things that I found with the belief system that you're talking about, it starts with a hypothesis that's usually negative. It's usually to disprove instead of prove. And I was wondering if that is an inherent trait of, doing science, to try to say it's not this, instead of having a more optimistic view and saying, you know what, we're going to solve longevity, or we're going to, decrease mortality rate, or something that is positive. It's always negative. I'll give an example. So when I was involved in studying like endocannabinoid system related uh, effects or whatever, when I was working with universities and there were granted studies, everything was about adverse events. It was all about the negative aspects. In my interpretation, I was like, well, I want to prove that it works and there's a positive, and everything was kind of pulled in the other direction. So is it an inherent part of science to start with a negative hypothesis?
I would say that's a fashion in science,
Uh,
because what was the hypothesis behind the Human Genome Project? There
yeah,
wasn't one. It's
yeah,
just, what is here? There was a very simple question, and then you went forward to be able to capture as much of what's present there in front of you.
right.
And so hypothesis really falls into experimental design. When you talk about science in the greater scheme of science, observe, measure, predict, whereas the hypothesis is in the measure portion, and it's when you want to make an experiment in order to get something testable, some kind of evidence. Now, it's useful to set it up in such a way. There's a lot of reasons why we do the negative version first, or highlight it so much. And we can go down the rabbit hole here, but in a big sense, safety first. Like something might have small benefits, but if it has 2% mortality rate, that doesn't come to fruition. I don't care if there's a 50% benefit if 1 out of 50 people dies. So we tend to go at it in a negative approach because it's also faster to be able to get to a certain outcome that we want, in terms of safety, or is this real or not. But there's also a problem where a lot of times we don't share negative information. And what I would say to anybody, if there's ever negative information published, why?
Yeah.
Because we don't share negative information. Hey, this antibody didn't work in this experiment. Hey, this drug didn't help this kind of condition, so on and so forth. That's not shared because it's a volume of information, and maybe there's some reasons as to call it not being so incentivized at the moment.
Yeah.
But when you share something like cold exposure has no, effect on the thyroid, or cannabinoids have no effect on, why is someone sharing a null effect? And then you have to go into the methods and see that individuals were standing in knee-high water, or individuals were given a synthetic version of a cannabinoid that didn't even really resemble what it was supposed to. It was close, but it wasn't really. So this game of science is a little bit dirty because a lot of things are masquerading as science. They look like science, but they're not. It's
Do you
marketing
think?
or
Yeah.
pseudoscience.
I was going to actually say, do you think it's actually related to clickbait? Like you brought up a great example about, we talk about cold exposure, with the from the Wim Hofs and the Joe Rogan, cold, cold, cold. Okay. If you start digging into science, if you're really a sciencey person, go and do your research. But most people are not. So what they do is they look at, social, whatever it is. So now you just bring up the headline that you just said, cold exposure has no efficacy, or whatever the ad is, or can be actually harmful. How many people are going to actually dig into the research and the science versus the pseudo news editorial that we have? And is that sort of, as you said, is that a trend right now to be able to do that? So the more exposure that you have, the more money you may be able to receive to do additional research, because more people are clicking on your clickbait of your pseudoscience, I guess.
I absolutely. I think it's both clickbait within, call it, the very forefront of individuals that are sharing information, but it's also clickbait, metaphorically speaking, from scientists that are publishing.
Right.
So, the individual that's publishing, keep in mind their funding or their means to be able to, the incentive to fund to publish that may not come through such a transparent means. If I own any kind of pharmaceutical company, or let's say companies that do very well to sell you certain products, and cold is going to compromise my profits, like you going to cold exposure helps you deal with, let's say mitochondrial dysfunction, helps you deal with hormonal imbalances, helps you deal with muscle atrophy, it helps you, all these things in which, well, I have all these companies. I'm going to then, really push for a certain type of publication. And we see this across, I mean, way before I was born. Let's
Right.
be honest, probably before you were born too. And so there's clearly a game of, money talks and who's established a enterprise and what are they going to do to be able to maintain and hold it. And you see this in absolutely every aspect, no matter where you look. You want to look chemistry, physics, so on and so forth. So absolutely a big part of it's clickbait. But I think this is a phenomenal event that's occurring. Why? Because individuals that want to say, hey, cold is bad, they can go find what they want. Individuals want to say, hey, cold's good, they can find what they want. That's fine. But eventually it's going to come to a point where the individual will recognize, like, wait a minute, if both things are in front, either both things are true within context or neither of them are true and I'm being bamboozled. And eventually they'll step into a position of asking the question. Instead of speaking before they've done any work, before sharing their ideas, before they've actually formulated one, they'll go and they say, hey, I actually don't understand this. Maybe I should go talk to someone that does, that really likes the stuff, and find somebody I can trust. And once they do, now we're getting into, I think, something that's very positive, where we're establishing networks where we're doing what we are born to do, so to speak. For me, biology has always been, I'm not, it's been easy. Playing music, that was hard. Learning how to play guitar, I have two left hands. That's not a skill I was born with. But abstract thinking, DNA, biology, it was always very intuitive for me. And so I will do this for the better part of mankind. There's some issues that need to be rectified. I'll bring out the context and I'll share what I know through, call it the science that I've learned, right? The ability to communicate this is an extreme skill that is very particular. The language is extremely important, and why I think today nobody really knows what science is anymore. Because look what people are saying. Trust the science. I am the science. Science hasn't yet realized. That doesn't make grammatical sense.
Yeah, I think it's about having an influence. Like, people have the ability and platforms to be able to talk about what they may be doing, and people, because they have such influence, like you and I having a conversation, it could be a lot of influence. People could be listening to this, and I could say, you know what, cold doesn't work for me. I prefer heat. Heat works for me, but that's a personal experience for me. If I have a wide enough platform and I forget to say, for me, now I'm influencing thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people to say, I listened to so and so and they said, cold is no good, try this. So I just want to get, like, when you started talking about this whole notion of adverse effects, and there's an FDA process of do no harm, efficacy scale kind of thing, right? Which is still in place for clinical trials and research, but there's so much observational research that's going on, and there's so much of this, the quote unquote biohacking community, which I hope we come up with a better terminology, better title for this. But it's people who are now, we have all this information available to us. Now we can go and do and try out certain things. The difference, I think, between doing it today and how it was yesterday is the ability for us to amplify that what works for us. And we've seen it so many times over the last whatever many years, since actually COVID probably. And everybody's like, well, now you shift the perspective to, okay, this works, but it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. It worked for me. So I want to kind of get your thoughts around this notion of the herd mentality and the influence we have.
It could be the hypnotizing effect of screens and computers. It might have always been. I don't know. I was alive in the, call it the screen era, but it is imperative that you go experience life, because you're right. At a certain point in time, I'd say, hey, cold has done all these wonderful transformational effects for my body, and I go in the sauna and I get incredible resilience and phenomenal sleeps. And you go and say, well, last time I was in the cold exposure, I had nerve damage.
Exactly.
So you must go experience life. I mean, and there's a certain, this is the part that's exciting. We're in a personalized health era, right? There's never been a time where I can look at an individual with more with different ways of coming at you, with a microscope, with blood samples, with transcriptional information, genetic information. There's never been more ways that I can look at an individual, but it's still none of that trumps your experience of what you're going through right now. And that's where we gather, call it, more information so that we can better try and share it with the next individual. Because maybe there is an inhibitor. This is the story of biology. Maybe there's an inhibitor present for you at the moment. It could be
Right.
psychological, it could be physiological, it could be genetic. And until you get in some kind of positive relationship with that inhibitor so that you can turn it off or inhibit the inhibitor, you're not going to be able to use what was beneficial for someone else in the same way. There's still the, call it, laws of physics, the laws of biology, laws of thermodynamics. Cold has a certain type of interaction with specifically human cells. There's something that's, I think, not stated enough, where the biochemistry does get a little complicated, but an animal like a dog or a mouse and a human being, we don't react the exact same way to cold. The human being has more cells that are able to dump energy when you expose yourself to cold. Whereas the animal, it's restricted in which cell types can actually dump energy in the form of heat. So we know you can't break the laws of thermodynamics, but you can change, call it, these expression values. Some people might have a lot more, some people might have a lot less of expression of a certain, call it, protein. And this is the part where it gets really difficult, because yes, you can look at the genetics, but there's adaptation.
Yeah.
You can adapt to what you're doing. And this is why it never goes zero to hero. I can't tell you how many times I take people to Lynn Valley here in Vancouver, which is cold water, glacier water, and even in the summertime, it's still around 5-6 degrees. So like in the 30s, 20 some Fahrenheit. I won't do math that fast, but close to freezing, right? Just above freezing. And every once in a while, I'll get the macho guy that's going to be in there. It's going to be in there for 10, 15 minutes on his first time. Now, when I was younger, I'd let him get hurt, not knowing that, like, okay, everyone has to go through himself. Now I pull him out. I say, hey man, you're numb. You need to go outside, get warm again. Let's see if you start shivering after being out for just 10 minutes. And if you're not, you can go back in if you feel good. But this is where you just need to go slow and steady. Just like building muscle, just like learning how to read, just like doing anything, slow and steady to progress into it so that you can see how you progress, what your kinetics are. Because they're not the same. Two twins are the closest genetic thing, call it comparisons, and they have different responses based
Right.
off their mental states, based off what they've done, who they've interacted with. And so, this is the part where you got to go live life and then get the skill set to share it with the rest of us. And if you don't have it, then use, call it, what's available so that you can help describe what's going on to you. And so
Yeah.
that you can also be an archetype of your own, right? This is something I have come to an understanding is every single individual has a unique genome. And so they are showcasing to you, to all of us, life's possibilities. They are their own archetype.
No, it's a great point, and I believe in personalization. Obviously, it's what I kind of do for a living, but you're absolutely right about people's own neurochemistry guiding the expression of some of these things, which we don't know. You could be stressed today, or you could be depressed today, and if what you're feeling, involves the release of neurochemicals that could guide the expression. And today you have one result, and tomorrow you may have a different result. So you're absolutely right. I wanted to talk about your own origin story, because I think it's important for people to understand kind of your own journey, what you went through. So where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in former Yugoslavia, right? Country doesn't exist anymore. I'm a rare gem. No more of me are going to be born on the planet. But the majority of my life, I grew up in Vancouver, Canada.
But Yugoslavia, sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah,
it's multiple countries now.
that's
So
right.
which part of that I was born in the Soviet Union, so
Nice.
In Lithuania, but
Cool.
it's its own country
Yeah.
now, but it was part of this Soviet Union, so very similar in a way. So which part of that?
So I was born in Sarajevo, which today's modern day Bosnia,
Okay.
and it was sort of the theater hub, the kind of the cultural hub for Yugoslavia, where a lot of performance, comedians, musicians. That's really my mom and dad. They love all that stuff, and
Yeah.
everyone was born, even though they're from different parts of Yugoslavia. Everyone's born in Sarajevo, serendipitously, I guess. And
Yeah.
so it was a very, like, quick worldview developing as a child. I had very little belief that anything is this permanent. It was constant. There's a constant flux and a change to the world, and I saw it almost like the tide coming in and out. My attention was always drawn to biology, to life. All of the man-made infrastructures and stuff, they were interesting. I like the construction and thinking like, what is it made of? What materials they're using? But very much so with questions of, existential questions as a kid. Like if my mom was somebody else, if my dad was somebody else, who would I be today? Right?
Interesting.
Like where was my consciousness before it was present here with me? And I'm a 6-year-old, keep in mind.
So how old were you when you moved from Yugoslavia to Canada?
I turned 6 in Vancouver, so it was
Same, same.
just at that time, and we were in Crkvenca in Croatia as the war broke out, and
Yeah,
difficulty happened. We were in quite a quiet, call it, part, at that time,
yeah.
and so my my call it connection or my desire to pursue science, I believe I was born that way,
Okay.
and because I had so many, call it, health issues as a kid,
I was
allergic.
going to say you had, was it asthma, and then you had GI issues? Like,
Yes.
talk about some of your own health challenges that you had.
Oh, it was allergic to everything. I'm talking, I can't sleep on a feathered pillow because I'd wake up and just like a red balloon. Any animal, cats, dogs, brutal. And obviously the nutrition part wasn't really there. The understanding of how nutrition plays a role into these allergies. I thought milk and cereal were, the breakfast of champions, as marketing told us. And I thought I should eat constantly, eat 3 meals a day. You got to eat, where are you going to get your energy? I followed all the, call it, better, call it
Yeah.
public available knowledge, which led you down to problems, you name it. But also, I would, I'm not sure to say that they were genetic or call it any kind of problems that I was born with. I think it was more developed as, what was I exposed to? What did I eat? What was my, how often I was eating? I think it's very simple because now today I've fixed all that.
So
There is no issues.
do you think that was more of an autoimmune response to the environment and the new things that were entering your body as well? Your immune system maybe over under responded to that?
Absolutely. So, we know, I call it the global we, that
Yeah.
in times of stress or duress, that your nervous system is going to dictate whether call it, your gut's more porous or not.
Yeah.
And if you're eating in a state where you're one taking in chemicals that aren't more the best for you, as well as then being in you're not relaxed. Your vagus nerve hasn't turned on rest and digest. There's going to be a flood of contents moving into your blood, flows over into your lymph. Now your lymph's hyperreactive. You're allergic to everything. The mechanisms are understood. The specific details are difficult for anybody to
Right.
figure out. Hey, what is it that has actually got me to this state? And so I lugged that around until I was in my early 20s when I really
Wow.
I spent the better half of my youth, with school and water polo. I was a very strong kid. I had I said blessed, call it, parents and brother, where from 14 years old I was lifting weights. And I'm the tallest in my family by quite a bit. So this idea that it stunts growth back at the time, that was the first bit of controversy where when I saw it and I decided to learn, but well, why would weights stunt my growth? And, my brother and my dad say, no, that's nonsense. Go ahead, lift. And I went and investigated, and I found the opposite from a very young age. I pulled up research, the literature, unable to really comprehend it, but just going through and saying, well, I know that your bone's got a little epiphyseal plate, little cartilage is going to expand. And when I see what leading researchers say, they say no, stress and acute loading force across the epiphyseal plate actually gets it to grow more. So here I have a community and this myth of, it stunts your growth. And then I pull up the literature and the leading experts tell you the exact opposite. And I was like, wow, okay, that's pretty interesting. So I got very strong and I played water polo for Team Canada in my youth. And it was at that time that I decided that, as fun as it is to play sports, really this calling for medicine or science was there. So I put that on the back burner. But at that time too, I started seeing a lot of things that don't add up. from individuals coming to share information on diet and on training with us. But when I pick up the books from, one person I had a great admiration for was a gentleman named Michael Kogan. And I got on his radar because he was one of the individuals, along with, I think, about a dozen others, that pushed to change the food pyramid. And I don't know if people are familiar, but the first food pyramid that was published was quite the joke. It was pretty much marketing 101 of, hey, we want to sell cereals, grains, and, this type of stuff. So that was called at the base. And you had all of the nutritionists, the call it physiologists, kind of tearing their hair out, being like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
So I read all of Michael Kogan's books on, how to be a, champion, how to be an athlete. He's worked with Olympic athletes for, the better part of his career. And I saw the guy, the people that are presenting to us tell us the exact opposite. They're like, you guys need to eat constantly, all day, every day. You need to ingest about 8,000 calories. And that part's fine. Yeah, we're, very high level volume of training. But like eat all day, every day, like it just tires you out. You're exhausted from eating, then you have to go train. You haven't digested your food. So that was like a small mishap. But constantly, as I'm going through this journey of, hey, I want more information. I'm interested in what am I? How do we function? There's a never ending, I would say, evidence of the opposite of what people are saying.
Yeah.
But you have to go and look, right?
Well, yeah, but I think that's just the challenge is well, you brought up some really, really good points. I want to reemphasize this because one of the challenges that I see is trust. Like if you can get information and you brought up a great example of this whole weightlift. I heard this all my life too. I don't know if this is an Eastern Bloc world kind of thing because all the weightlifters were really stocky and short, and my parents used to say, "Don't lift weights because it's going to stun your growth." Okay, maybe. And I wasn't, I didn't dig deeper into it. Just intuitively, I didn't think that was the case. But as you go through and you say, okay, there is somebody saying this, but then you find out the opposite. How do you gain trust? Maybe because you work with biological age and you work with other predictive health analytics and stuff, and you've dug into the science. How do we kind of maybe there's something you uncovered in your biomarker analysis or something like that? How do we get the general public that is fed information and now with TikTok, etc. Everybody's a doctor, Dr. Google, and you're doing different things. And now you're telling this community, do these kind of things. This is what works. And then the medical community is telling you something different. Like, how can you actually be your own health and wellness expert and then also connect with trusted sources based on real scientific evidence? And I'm going to put a caveat to that, long-winded question to this, but just because I'm in the field of, genetics and epigenetics there are inferences, what I'm saying? It's not a black and white direct line. You may need to read into it a little bit more. So you have to expand your mind and be open to that and then have some experimentation that goes along with it. Maybe the science is not black and white. Maybe there's gray involved in that. But how do you gain trust? What are the sources you go to, and what are some of these things you may have uncovered in your own analysis of biomarkers, etc.?
Yeah, I think gaining, call it expertise, wherever you're curious in is a must, and then forming a network. Because as much as I'm good with data and good with numbers, if I want to talk real estate, I don't even know where to start to look at where I can say this is credible information. Like, sure, someone can say, here's a database, go ahead, use it. But do I know how to be able to shuffle that data around to be able to pull out important information? Do I know the timings and all that? Maybe, but I would have to spend possibly a month learning it, 2 months, a year, because I have to go and experience something before I say, okay, this is how I gain confidence in area X. And so I have spent well over 2 decades gaining confidence in biology. And I'll just say the broad word biology as it encompasses, the sports psychology aspect, it encompasses biomarkers, it encompasses blood work, all the kind of anything related to biology. I'll just use that as a general umbrella where I'm interested in what the hell am I? So that's where it really helps me because I'm interested to know not an outcome, but I'm interested to know a mechanism or how it is working. And as I've gone through this, I have a very fast, call it dismissive consciousness to things that don't hold a lot of validity. And I can pick it up very quickly. I've spent a lot of time in it. You know, the 10,000 hours to gain expertise in somewhere, I've stopped counting. And for me, you do need to have a way in which you sit back and reevaluate your beliefs or your approach. So you're going to evaluate your methodology. And as you refine your methodology, you'll get to a point where what I recognize in all experts, all people that are pushing the field, is that you come down to a very few set of principles. And no matter what piece of information can come in, you know how to silo it and always be in the right ballpark. You don't have to be right, but you're in the right ballpark. And so anything that you build off from there is always useful. And the world is going to constantly throw time wasting problems at you. And the goal is that you don't spend time solving things that don't have anything to build off of. And once you get to a point where you're like, okay, I recognize that if I want health, I must spend some amount of time learning the words and the jargon in which everyone's using. If I don't, I'm subject to someone else's, call it, belief structure, and I have to trust in them. And that's fine. We must trust in people, and people might let us down, but we're at fault for giving someone else authority. So I can say, okay, Daniel, you're an authority, great. And I now have to hold that in some level of reverence and go in day and out, showcasing to you I'm worth being that authority figure. Not because I have a piece of paper that says I passed some test, but because day in and day out, I'm showcasing my competency within this field. And if I'm no longer competent, you shouldn't trust me. It's that simple. And the networks that we make today is going to be the distinguishing factor. And this is I think the rule of business, really. Your network and who you establish with is whether you have an empire or whether your business is just turning over. You might have a phenomenal product and you might have a terrible product that sells very well based off the network you established, but usually terrible products don't last long. Usually the ones that have a lot of validity, they'll stand a test of time if they can find their footing, if the timing is right, if they can find that network. And so for the very obvious thing today in health, I'd say it's unbelievably challenging. Unbelievably. Even for myself, who was trained, I have a hard time distinguishing every aspect of it. And I have to say, okay, well, until I can see better outcomes, until I can see a better, call it, setup of how this is, I don't have to dismiss it. I can say this works for, the case study, but I might not be able to pull too much from that. And in other instances, there could be a case study in which I go absolutely bonkers over because it showcases to me a possibility that I didn't know before. Right. So hard to answer that, but I do think it comes back to the notion of establishing a proper network, having that, call it, honest, having the cojones to say, hey, I don't know, and to be able to reevaluate really your belief structure, which I don't think is something that most people are doing today.
Well, I also think it's like sort of practice what you preach, the people that you surround yourself. I had an interaction with a doctor. The doctor was giving me a whole bunch of recommendations for health and wellness, while the guy is extremely overweight and smokes cigarettes. So I'm going to take the information that was given to me, and maybe analytically he knows, but I discount it immediately based on the source that information is coming from, because he's not living that lifestyle. So if you think and you believe that you should eat right, whatever, not smoke cigarettes and exercise, just do the basics. And you're telling me what I should do, but you're not doing that yourself. That's probably the first step of saying, I'm gonna question that a little bit more. I wanted to ask you about the hype, I guess, around longevity. I just, even longevity itself is just odd. Like, I had an aunt who lived till 102. Living is, I use that word sparingly because the last, let's say, 10 years, it was surviving and existing in life. Like, you're alive, but you're not really living. So just longevity itself is odd. Like who the hell wants to live till 120 and last, 30 years you're in a diaper kind of thing. So I wanted to get your thoughts on this hype around, and I'll still call it longevity, maybe health span, and what's based on like facts and ongoing biological feedback versus, the experts that are talking about the basics that we know that we need to do, as I said before, like eat right, exercise, get your sleep, take your vitamins, as Hulk Hogan, rest in peace, kind of said, which he probably took some extra vitamins along with that, not disparaging, the life of the best wrestler probably ever. But still, I'm saying that there is so much hype around this. What is real? What is not based on science and the research that you're doing yourself?
It's a phenomenal question. I think the hype is real and it's part of a fashion and science or just a generation that is being marketed to. It's individuals that might be in their 50s and 60s that they can maybe stretch and get a little bit more health span out of it, and lifespan. But a lot of what you need to do in order to get to 100, 102, you had to have done a lot earlier on. So I do genuinely like the idea of longevity as something in terms of it means to communicate health because risk is boring, right? To say, hey, you have a 40% increased chance of arthritis, that doesn't mean anything. That genuinely doesn't mean anything. And the problem with that is it makes people step away from resources and I think really cool biology. And so when you tell someone, hey, you're 10 years younger in your heart rate. Hey, you're 10 years younger in your lung capacity. It's so easy.
Yeah.
You can say, hey, I'm trying to give it a score, and that score is we're calling age, and it's completely fabricated. So
Thank you. Yeah.
it is absolutely just a concept. It's useful. There is a utility, and not to that be understated. So I think because there's so much information I would like to share with you, and it may be useful, it may not be, but this is the best that we have. And so how can I share that to you in the simplest, most comprehensive, in a way in which you want to engage in, which is a big part. And why I say it's a concept is that even as we build algorithms and we build ways to assess biological age, they're very rudimentary. And I have an individual, here's the best way how this all breaks. I have an individual where I can't run him through any type of biological age in his blood because if I do, he comes out to like 180. He's 90
Yeah.
years old and he has Alzheimer's and he's still alive. And he's surviving people that had way better blood work, that didn't have these conditions, that died at 80, 82,
Yeah.
And so how do I rectify this? How do I say this individual exists? If I put any kind of formula for his blood, it has to be in comparison to something else. So the
Yeah.
best comparison we have is ourselves, because again, we're the unique circumstance of all of our life experience. And so we don't have a laboratory following each one of us around all the time. So we have to do some level of I compare to others and I compare to myself through time.
Yeah.
And in this way, longevity becomes, I think, a very, very useful way to be able to start bringing in information. It might not be the best way to talk about it, but to be able to present it to people that aren't as, call it, biologically obsessed with the biomolecules of life. The second part that I think is really insightful about longevity, just for individuals that make it to 100, it's an opportunity to examine, to observe, to measure what are they doing? What is going on over there that allows, and I'm gonna use a vague, mystic life force to exist
Yeah.
there. And I say life forces because as much as I know, I still don't have a understanding of what is it that keeps this gentleman that's 91 still alive. I can say it's his respiratory function. His heart rate and blood pressure, they're maybe not ideal. His heart rate's lower than what you'd expect for someone of that age. And his ventilation, his lung capacity is phenomenal. So is that the answer? Is it just lung capacity? I don't think so, but I think that is you're seeing an outcome, a variable of something else that's underlying, that's doing an extreme integrity for life to be able to harbor there. And I've loved exploring called the philosophy, what other cultures called it. We have the word animal and has the prefix anima. We have animation, has the same prefix anima. And the idea of anima is the force of life that's moving through, bringing animation to what would be otherwise not existent. Other cultures call it breath and other things, but there's clearly life force in which is coordinated. We can think nervous systems working, connective tissues working, muscular systems working, blood systems, or all of these things are working very, very well, and they all have a certain level of strength and integrity.
Yeah.
How we now bring strength and integrity to those systems is fascinating. And longevity is now a way of saying, instead of integrity, I can say, this thing has more longevity.
Yeah.
Integrity might be the better way, but
I love that
longevity is
explanation. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go
so.
ahead.
Yeah, no. So that's my take on the matter. And for what we have to do to make it to 100 years old, you have to start it earlier. But even if right now today, if someone's in their 60s, it's pretty simple. You have to take care of your recovery systems. You mentioned sleep; that's the number one.
Yeah.
But the principle there is recovery system. And the next thing, you have to fast.
Yeah.
Eating constantly is very destructive for the system. It's expensive. That's number three. Digestion is expensive. It's extremely expensive for you to make enzymes and then throw them out there and then pull in food, and you pull in too much. Now you have to deal with it. Digestion is a massive tax on the system. And the more efficient you can make it, the longer you're going to get. And then you need some type of mindset. I call it mood and temperament. But your mindset can't, like, no one that's a miserable prick makes it to 100 years old. That's not a good way to go about
That's true.
holding on to life. If holding probably the wrong way to say, but embracing or surfing more of life. Their mindset of the individuals that make it to 100 is often very sarcastic or kind of humorous,
Yeah.
and it's extremely resilient. They don't get bogged down in belief systems. I would say they're religious without any religion, where they have a reverence for life and a belief in what they were given was all that they needed in order to be able to live, live a full life. And then the last one that comes up, and these, I give this list from comparing. This is the key thing in science. You got to do fair comparisons.
Mhm.
From comparing people that are 100 years old that have no health issues to other individuals that have no health issues that didn't make it to 100. And when you see that, your nutrition doesn't even come into the top five. The nutrition is, you just have to eat the nutritional requirements.
Mhm.
The factor that comes out of more importance is that you're not overeating or abusing your digestive system, because as long as you get your required nutrients, your body can function. And then the last one that comes up very high is cold in particular. So this is why I was fascinated with cold. I've been participating in it since I was early 20s. And I started doing it because I saw, okay, individuals that make it to a very long lifespan in communities, the Scandinavians, the Okinawa Japanese, Hunza, Afghanistan, where you looked at these populations, they had some kind of cold exposure, either full practice in their culture or just by nature of where they lived, they were exposed to cold. Everyone that lives in very hot climates, the Mediterranean climates, yes, you have sometimes make it to a certain age, but it's not on average as much. And so there's also a eco-geographical rule called Bergman's rule, where if you take penguins, the largest penguin is in the cold regions. The biggest creatures of the similar species in comparison are further towards the poles. So cold itself is a phenomenal stimulus. It's like you go to the gym to lift weights. Cold is another stimulus that helps integrity on these different systems: the nervous system, the connective tissue system, the blood system. And so that's the top five. This is what we got to do to be able to stay healthy. Sauna is good too.
Yeah.
Different. So I would say number five would be thermotherapy. It's the cold, hot. Cold might have a little bit of an edge there.
Yeah.
Might.
There's so many things you said that I want to unpack. So let me see if I can kind of go through a few. First of all, this whole molecular individuality, as you refer to it, and I think it makes total sense. We don't know. There are people who smoked all their life, ate shit, and lived till 100 years old. But I do think you brought up something extremely important as an intangible, which is this notion of emotional intelligence and mood. when we talk about blue zones, and a lot of them you talked about, what do they eat? They exercise. I mean, at A4M, we go to this conference, longevity conference. The guy wrote a book about it. He's got a show about it. He tells you all the commonalities. They eat this, they walk up, they have a glass of wine, they have community. But I think I'm not sure if they're measuring neurochemistry. I'm curious about the release of oxytocin, the release of serotonin on that longevity and how that impacts. And I also love the fact of this whole biological age as a measuring tool that's not a end all, but it's an easy way for us to say, all right, I'm going to compete against myself. I'm going to see what my methylation is and versus me doing something else and then seeing what the methyl groups are, their additions to the methyl groups or subtractions, instead of me digging through the science and trying to figure out, oh shit, this genetic no, I have a number. I have a number, and it's very easy for even healthcare professionals don't want to get into the science of it. They just want something quick and easy. So at least we have a nomenclature that we can kind of agree to right now. And it's going to change all this stuff. And the last thing that I'm glad you brought it up, because I was going to talk about heat to cold exposure or the changes in body temperature. So it's not only being exposed if you're living in Alaska and you're in cold all the time, obviously not all the time, or in Siberia, but versus having to experience multiple seasons, or walking out of a sauna. Like I remember when I was a kid, sauna was a big thing, but what we used to do is we had a house in the Poconos, in the mountains there, and we would go in the sauna and then jump in the snow afterwards. So that difference in heat and cold, we didn't know that it's for quote unquote longevity, but this is what my parents said. And in the Scandinavian countries, they have saunas in their homes for that kind of thing to vary the temperature from hot to cold. So I was thinking that is a good way for us to be able to do both. But I wanted to ask you about the notion of sort of exercise and you mentioned like sleep, and it's not only sleep, it's just quality of sleep. I'm assuming, right? Not just sleep 8 hours a day. And then so the exercise, because you talked to me about skipping, for instance, as an exercise. So I want you to talk to people about different exercise. And the second thing, before I forget this question, is about the food pyramid. You brought up a really important thing. So in science, in medicine, we have a philosophy, the food pyramid. We were taught that in school. You eat your grains, you eat your dairy. All of a sudden, that's wrong for us. So as science kind of moves forward, this is what I want to get people to understand. It's not set in stone. It's only in the moment. You're capturing a moment in time, and then that whole individual molecular biology that you have to do your own research, but expect maybe we're going to discover something else, and there's going to be changes in those things that we think are right now. So the intangibles that you talked about, they're set in stone. We know we need to eat right, whatever eat right means. I think it's an individual thing. Yes, we know, don't eat processed food, don't eat, for the most part, don't eat simple carbs and all that stuff. So we kind of know what to eat within, there's different variances, I guess, within that too. We know that we need sleep, how much we get, also an individual thing. Quality of sleep is extremely important, that heat and cold exposure. And the last thing is the exercise part of it. So what do you think are, like, here are the key measurements that I know that I'm going to have to stick to now, regardless of what's going to happen in the future science, because these things are set in stone. I'm just going to do this. And then if science changes the food pyramid to something else, is ketosis so important, or is it something that's going to change in the next few years because we're going to research something else?
I love it. That's a great question. I mean, well, first thing I would say is that was the food pyramid science? Does that qualify? You know what I mean? Like when you hand in a report at school or whatever university, and someone marks it, and you're like, no, you got like 3 out of 10. you tried to do science, but you didn't do it. So with the food pyramid initially, I'm pretty sure it was very deliberately conned information. It was clearly paid for. Hey, put this on there because it's not testable. There's no evidence. Heck, the evidence was on the contrary, even at that time,
Hey,
right?
you mean milk doesn't do the body good?
Well, I mean, to be fair, that one I think is quite the red herring, where milk at a certain point in time is nature's growth formula, and then we do a thing where we destroy all the nutrients in it and just present a sugar slurry, and then say, oh well, look, there's bad things and good things for it. The level of deception present today is very, very disheartening until you realize, okay, this is part of the game, and I can either participate on one side or the other, right? So you get to pick, and it feels good no matter what side you're on, because hey, either I'm uncovering truth, or hey, either I'm making a lot of money for the time being. So, in that regard, you know, just keep moving forward. That's how I have to say. In terms of science, yes, it will change. Right now, I would say your heart rate is a phenomenal measurement of health. Is that better than your respiratory rate? Arguable. Is ketosis something that's going to change in the future? No. So what things are stable throughout, going to be relevant 100 years from now? You're still going to have a ketose pathway, right? And I'll just reiterate for individuals, you can take fat, and once you allow yourself to be in a state of no insulin, your fat can then be burnt for production of ketones. It's not actually burnt, it's oxidized, but figure speech. And then those ketones can be used by the brain. And if you train, they aren't used by the muscle, but if you train in fasted states, you can start having your muscle upregulate the machinery to take in ketones and use it as a fuel. But more importantly than using ketones as a fuel, it's ketones as a signaling molecule. So how do we change gene expression? You change it with a ketone. So if you never allow yourself to enter ketosis, we know that pathway of the genome isn't activated. And what is the pathway that ketones activate? It's cardioprotection. It's neuroprotection. So is that going to change 100 years from now? No, that ketone is still going to signal that pathway because that is what I'd say the rules of biology. That is the laws of thermodynamics, so to speak. And so it is very, very useful now to be able to parse out what things are crystal clear. What are those basics I referred to that you can pull into a silo to say, hey, if I want to have great metabolic health, here's I know what to look at. It might not be the best, but it's good for right now because it'll still be useful based off of how our information evolves. And though we might get better ones and have more information from the ones we have, it's still call it the gold star in what we are as a constellation of a human being. The heart rate, respiratory rate, I would think are some of the top. It's very difficult to look at cognition. That's one part that's very good. And I loved what you mentioned there about, hey, there's the blue zones, but they don't really talk about the neurochemistry, the emotional responses, the community. And that part, I think, is on purpose left out because the whole notion of the blue zones is a bit deceiving. It's this idea, hey, if I go to the gym and I eat right and I buy my supplements, I can live to 100 in my New York apartment. I was like, no, you can't. So that connection with other human beings, you don't even have to participate in the connection. So if we, as called, out unabused and our minds not in the psycho or socio or some kind of the minor percentage, just the average human being, which is the majority of us, if we see goodness, if we see one human being, something doing out of extreme kindness to another, even without participating in it, we release serotonin. Yeah. And that serotonin floods us with a state of feel good. We feel great. Some of us are about to cry seeing somebody else, like push. Let's say a girl's on a bike, she lost control, she's gonna smash into a pole, and a guy grabs her, he hurts himself, but he saves the girl. You're like, oh my goodness, and you're pumped. Yeah. No, that's a real physiological response. It's difficult to measure scientifically. It's not impossible, but very, very difficult. And this is where we get into the notion of experiencing life, learning how to communicate it so that when it comes time for a researcher and that finally has some funding, they can be like, oh, I'm gonna try and make this paradigm work and then measure these responses. And we're gonna find who's really empathetic and who's just bullshitting. And we're gonna find who's really intuitive and who's bullshitting. And we're gonna find who's really resilient, that they don't have any of these emotional responses, and we know they're the best person to act in a moment of danger. because they're not going through this whole feeling and thing. They can protect themselves from that. So this notion of, call it science, in which is very fashion today, is going to continue with the individuals that want to do work on this planet. And there's a really funny story with, I forget the gentleman's name now, but he's a researcher for land restoration in Africa, and he got two top ranked PhDs from one of the Ivy Leagues, and they got there, didn't know what to do. And he's like, all right, well, you're trained scientists. How would you approach this problem? Take a look at the land. How would you stratify it, and what would you start doing as a first means of exploration for land restoration? And they're like, there's no publication on this type of land. There's no prior knowledge on what we would do, or what we should, be doing on this, or what resources to throw at it. And he's like, but you're trained scientists. What are you doing here? How do you not know how to approach examining the world? Isn't this what they taught you? Like, no, they taught us how to go through literature and, make sure something works. And so the people that want to do the work, they're going to do the work, right? And I think it's important for them to have the resources to uplift themselves, to recognize, okay, you can do some of this work. It's extremely difficult. You might be laughed at, but it's probably worth doing if that's the case.
So great, great analogy. I love the way you answer that. In terms of, so let's say that I'm able to get you unlimited funding for a lab. You have it, you have resources, so you have personnel, you have the equipment, whatever you need. What is the research that you would do? What would you do with that? And what kind of, I mean, if this actually happens, I don't want you to give away sort of your secret sauce, but like from a high level, you have all the resources available to you. What are you going to do with that?
Yeah, I genuinely think that we haven't characterized the world anywhere near to extent where it's sufficient for us to have confidence in what's going on. So do
Mhm.
I think the majority of, call it, the principled work has been done? Yes, but I still think that we're lacking on basic characterization. And let's take a step there, that just like we mentioned, hey, someone has an emotional response, and they're like, oh, I have this gut feeling.
Yeah.
Right? There's a visceral feeling that scientifically we can, maybe it's cortisol, maybe it's adrenaline, maybe it's a ganglion that's, now activated. Why? I don't know. So we don't have a good characterization on, call it, challenges when we're faced. Like,
Mhm.
just baseline, we're hovering around, we're really good with that. But when you're presented with any kind of stressor, stimulus, paradigm, challenge, our bodies is designed to be dynamic and respond to it. So this is where I would be very interested in seeing first, what range of variability do we have individuals? I would expect somewhere in the realm of, the number 12. I just throw it out there as this is what the supercomputer of my
But how are
subconscious
you
tells me.
doing that? Are you asking like patient-reported outcome questions? Are you measuring biomarkers? Are you measuring biometric
I would,
feedback from
yeah.
a wearable
So
device? Like,
for sure. So first, we would try and get up as few non-invasive measures as possible. So we could have something, monitoring heart rate, monitor respiratory rate. Maybe if we're particularly interested in, we would start with maybe a specific nerve. Can we put an electrode somewhere near that would give us a proxy for, hey, sympathetic, parasympathetic activation? Can we do something invasive and get, maybe some phrenic nerve activation, something along those lines? We'll play with the teeter-totter, what someone's comfortable with. And then the hard part is what kind of scenarios can we put those individuals in? Right? Because drawing blood, that's pretty easy. You can do it at baseline and then at some time points after. That would be very, very useful, the drawing blood portion. But I would say the drawing blood portion is a bit of a red herring in itself. It's
yeah.
useful to have what I would say baseline and then adaptation blood. There is so many responses in the blood that you could spend a lifetime, and I would say an entire country, focusing on just blood responses. But at the end, you're still going to find that that wasn't enough of a, that's just the blood system. Yes, it's the media that everything flows in. So there'd be a better way to approach examining it. It would be good, I would think, long-term adaptation views. But this understanding of how a person is able to respond to a challenge would be where I would start really pushing the paradigm, is because every single opportunity that is a stressor is an opportunity for growth.
Mhm.
And I would like to know who has the advantage there of how as a coach can I challenge you better? That's really the background. If I'm a coach, I know I can't challenge every single one of my, athletes the same. How can I challenge you? I mentioned skipping to you
Yeah.
because skipping is a very easy skill that we can lose. And when we lose it, a whole boatload of restrictions come into play. Whereas if you can maintain it, it's good for the digestive system, the viscera, the connective tissue, your cartilage, the tendons, the nervous system, coordination. So there's a lot of benefit in maintaining neuromotor complexity. Is that the right challenge for you? Now, I
Yeah.
have some bias in how I've lived and worked, and individuals that have come through my arms, and so I can guess pretty good, but I always want to be a little bit better. I
Do
don't
you-
I don't want to get to a point where someone has a stroke in front of me, and
yeah.
that has happened. Right? They don't blame me for it. They say, "Hey, this is my opinion," but I feel like could I have done better for them?
Do you think that AI can help to accelerate some of that information gathering and predictions based on data? Because, as you're talking, we're talking about individual. There's so many data points. Like you just said, you can use a country to analyze blood, but can't you just, get in your own, medical LLM and train that model to analyze that so we can accelerate that research?
So, yes, and here's the big caveat: is that me and you still need to go put information out there so the LLMs have something to work with.
Yeah.
And the information that we put out there is pivotal into the quality that the LLMs can work with. Now, the LLMs or the AIs that people are referring today, which what's the distinction now? There's the AIs that are referred to large language models, and then there's the generative AI or the
Yeah.
idea of like so that aside. So these LLMs, they make my work so much easier.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
they've things that used to take me a week take me 4 hours now,
Right. Right.
legitimately. And there is problems, of course, but then I can come through back and see like, oh, okay, this got flipped. Oh, this was the opposite,
Yeah.
and then use my experience to audit it. So in terms of these large language models, they've been a phenomenal welcome.
Mhm.
However, it's like the calculator. You still got to know what to punch in there, and you still have to have good questions, good insight, and be able to formulate it. And I find that if you don't have any life experience, these large language models are super, super dangerous because you are recycling information that sometimes just could be flat out hallucinated, where
Yep.
it's the language model is pulling up one thing from one website, one thing from another website, and it just doesn't flow. Your perception of it is completely altered. And from my work with individuals, or it's belief systems that lead people astray.
Yeah.
So the hardest thing is telling someone, "Hey, your problem is your fault. It's because you believe something." But the
Yeah.
reality is that somewhere within our mental state, we decided something was okay, and it led us to a point where us having Crohn's disease, us having colitis, us having whatever else, back pain, this and that. So we have to find that belief, whatever it was, and dissolve it. And when you are using these large language models without any bearing to say, "Hey, I don't know," and you read it and you think that's the fact, I think they're gonna do. I think they're gonna do some. They're already probably doing some damage.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I know there's people talking in terms of, oh, this is gonna ruin students and it's destroying their hippocampus. I saw some publications on. It's very simple. The smart students, they're gonna have an easier time being smart. The students that are lazy or that have no interest in this type of stuff, they're going to use it to move through as students always have, and it might make them more sluggish and worse off. But
Yeah.
you're still going to have a divergence. The people that want to get ahead, the people that want to use it to get smart, they'll figure out how to be able to call it, find that self audit, that internal methodology that will make them a lot more confident with what they're doing. And it's only going to help accelerate, like you mentioned, accelerate to an unbelievable extent so that we're not mucking around so much, that we're
Yeah.
actually doing quality work, passing around, sharing around something that I think is going to be, to me, exciting.
Yeah. Learn how to use it. It's only going to get smarter and prompt it correctly. But I agree. The individual, your own ability to prompt and your lack of knowledge and in that is where the detriment comes in with the hallucinations and all those other things. I completely agree.
Human
All
beings.
right.
I mean,
Mhm.
I'll say you still got to create. That's one thing.
Yeah,
You must create stuff as a human being. If
for
you're not
sure.
creating parts in the world, these LMs got nothing, and you're just going to be recycling stuff. So, being in it doesn't have to be grandiose. Though. Each one of us is part in sharing what these LMs can pull from. You can notice that it pulls from Reddit posts.
Yeah,
So if you post something already of your personal experience, these LLMs now can say, well, this person had this experience. Here's this case scenario. So you're part of it. You got to participate in the creation from what AI can then generate.
for sure. All right, so I'm going to switch subjects for a little bit and talk about music, which I ask all my guests some music related questions. So let's see if we can have some fun with that. If you remember, what was the very first concert that you attended?
The very first concert, that's a challenge. I mean, the concert comes to mind because I liked it the most was Dave Matthews because that was the first time I saw what I would say a real musician.
Yeah.
Where everyone else was kind of bullshitting, but he was a real musician. So maybe the first concert wasn't David Guetta. I couldn't tell you.
All right, we'll leave it at Dave Matthews. Maybe
Yeah.
let's see that. All right, so what was the last concert that you attended?
The last concert I attended, it was a Crvena Jabuka, which is a Yugoslavian band.
All right,
And they're an old band, and they were playing here in Vancouver.
cool. All right. So for the next year, you can only listen to 5 albums.
Ooh.
Now, you don't have to mention the name of the actual album. It can
Mm,
be, a Dave Matthews band,
sure.
whatever. You can name the band, not the album if you choose. But what will be those 5?
Well, for sure, Zeppelin's on there. Then we'd have to go down the list and say something along the lines of I really like the house music, so I wouldn't know exactly what would be the album there, but there is a remix of Alan Watts' philosophy in different house music, and so that would be on the top of the list. And then we have the this is tough. I mean, I like Mumford and Sons because it's got a few really good kind of folksy music, so it's got its own genre on its own. That might make it up in the list. I would have thought that came to mind. Let's see what else here. Would have to be something classical rock, something that's got a lot. Maybe I would think of the big bands here. I'm thinking I might give it to the Bohemian Rhapsody Queen. Let's give it to Queen because I can listen to Bohemian Rhapsody on repeat. And then I got to give you number 5. Yeah, ooh, this is difficult. I might take one of the Yugoslavian bands there just to have a little diversity. And there's a gentleman named Oliver Dragovic, so he's kind of a champ on the music there.
Cool. All right. So final question. Please describe what your room looked like growing up.
My room growing up was a bunk bed with my brother,
Yeah.
and there's just a massive area where we would wrestle. And then there was called a desk, which probably never got touched. All the work was done at school as ASAP, so you never really have to do anything at home. And that's all I can really remember. Yeah.
Anything on the walls? Did you have any posters, any artwork, anything that's
Oh yeah,
memorable?
lots of artwork. I mean, I remember my brother in particular was a big fan of all the mafia movies. So I'm pretty sure we had Scarface somewhere on there. And then I always liked the solar system. So we had this contrast of we had Scarface and the Al Pacinos and the Robert De Niro's of the world. And then on the
Yeah,
other side we had I remember like a solar system where you had each planet with the names of the moons that are on it. So
love it.
yeah.
Daniel, where can people engage with you? Where can they find you? Where can they engage with your work and coaching and everything else?
Yeah, Timeline Sciences is my company, so you can find me at timelinescience.com. Pretty simple. We have one timeline. Science is the tool you use to describe it. I'm on X or Twitter. Not that good on social media, so the best is just to get in contact with me directly if you're interested or would like to explore how science and how to connect with science on different levels. I'm more than happy to come in different ways, seminars, lectures, or do the molecular profiling that's really the bread and butter of what I do.
Cool. And for my audience, thank you so much for staying with us. I hope this was educational for you as it was for me. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, share. And thank you again for all the wonderful feedback and the reviews and the 5 stars. Keep them coming. Thank you for buying my book, Making Cannabis Personal. There's 2 more on the way soon, but I'm going to hold up this one so you guys see that. You can get it on Amazon. It's funny. I have a picture in my office. If you can, those of you that are looking on YouTube. So when I first got my book published, it's over in the corner. I sent a selfie to somebody that said, "Hey, here's my book. I just got it published." And they framed that and blew it up and sent it back to me. So I have a framed picture of myself. Pretty narcissistic, I guess, in a way, but I am holding my book so I can use that to advertise. And once again, Daniel, thank you so much for being on. It's super, super informative. And yeah, all the best to you, man. Thanks for being on.
Absolute pleasure, Len.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching and listening. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button, share this episode, and hit that bell. Like, comment. I so appreciate that. And check me out on social under Len May or Len May DNA. Find out more on LinkedIn or lenmaycoaching.com. And remember, everything is personal.